Good morning, and thank you for attending Civics 201. This is session 3, Understanding Your Government, the differences between the U.S. Congress and the state legislature. And by state legislature in this presentation, we are specifically talking about the Texas State Legislature. One moment, please. Okay, and so let's go ahead and just dive right into this discussion. My name is Maria Medina Milner. I am representing the League of Women Voters of the Austin area as Vice President of Community Relations and Equity and Inclusion. Thank you for taking the time out on this Saturday morning to join us. So I just want to start with by saying the bulk of our contacting your representative content, as you'll see throughout this presentation, is created by Jennifer Delk. She is our League of Women Voters Austin Area Community Relations Director. And we just want to say thank you, Ms. Delk, for all of your hard work with compiling that. So first, what is the League of Women Voters of the Austin area? We're an organization that is open to everyone. It is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government and influences public policy through education and advocacy. So a couple of things that we do at the League of Women Voters of the Austin area are voter registration services, get out the vote activities, voters guide, and we do our voters guide digitally as well through vote411.org. That is vote411.org. We also have candidate forums for various elections. We also offer a high school voter education program and registration program as well. We do policy presentations through our policy and advocacy arm. And finally, we do civics education programs such as the one that you are watching or attending today. So what is the U.S. Congress? It's a group that represents the people of the United States of America. They're part of our legislative branch in the United States government. They make our nation's laws. They share power with the executive and the judicial branches, and they're the only branch that's elected directly by the people at the federal level. And so this, if you happen to watch our presentation on the U.S. Congress later, you might see that you might see this slide in that information as well. So we'll be posting that fairly soon. So what is the U.S. Congress continued? It's a bicameral legislative branch of government. It's put together by it's composed of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Both have equal but very unique roles, and each has special constitutional duties and powers. Who can be a U.S. House representative? House reps must be, or candidates vying for House representative must be at least 25 years old. They must be 7 years a U.S. citizen. They must be an inhabitant of the state where they are chosen, and they are elected every 2 years. The number of House of Representatives at the U.S. level are apportioned among the states by population. And then in the case of the senator, who can be a U.S. senator? U.S. senator candidates must be at least 30 years old. They must be citizens of the United States for 9 years. They must also be inhabitants of the state in which they are chosen or elected, and they are elected every 6 years. There are 2 senators to every state. So what is the Texas Legislature? It represents the people of Texas, much like the U.S. Congress represents the people of the United States of America. They make laws for Texans specifically. I know this kind of feels for maybe a lot of our very active listeners or viewers that seems kind of a no-brainer, but sometimes it can be difficult to kind of discern where the federal laws end and where the state laws begin. And so they also share power with the executive and judicial branches of our state government in that all 3 branches must work together for a cohesive state government. This, again, is a bicameral legislative branch of government, much like the U.S. Congress. It is also comprised of a House of Representatives and the Senate. Their duties include consideration of proposed laws and resolutions, also proposed constitutional amendments. They appropriate all funds for all of our state operations. So who can be a Texas House rep or representative? They must be at least 21 years old. Said person must also be a U.S. citizen or a resident of the state of Texas, or citizen of the state of Texas. There's a 2-year minimum Texas resident. They must be Texas resident for a minimum of 2 years immediately preceding their election. They must be a resident of their district for a minimum of 1 year immediately preceding their election. Texas House representatives get elected every 2 years, and they must be a qualified elector. So some of the similarities of the House of Representatives at the Texas level, legislative level, and the US Congress level, both House of Representatives have the sole power of impeachment of officers at each level. All bills for raising revenue originate in both the sets of Houses of Representatives, whether it's at the congressional level or the state level here in Texas, and both sets of representatives serve 2-year terms. And both sets of representatives also have no amount of term limits or an unlimited amount of term limits they can serve, which is actually something that is to consider if you are looking at how it affects you. So take 1 minute, please. Okay. So who can be a Texas senator? The Texas senators must be at least 26 years old. They have to be a Texas citizen immediately preceding the election for a minimum of 5 years. They must be district residents immediately preceding an election for a minimum of 1 year. They can serve 2 or 4 year terms. It's also depending on whether there are vacancies, and they alternate. Half of the Senate alternates for election every 2 years. So the similarities of the Senates, both Senates have the sole power to try all impeachments. And again, much like the House of Representatives for both, there are no term limits to how many times a senator can serve in that position. So the differences between the US Congress and the Texas Legislature are actually a lot more varied, I guess. So in the Texas Legislature, the Texas Lege for short, there are detailed restrictions on tax and spending policies. That restricts where or what the Texas Legislature can write into law. Whereas in the US Congress, they pass laws on taxes and appropriate spending for any fiscal policy measures. So there are only 2 legitimate purposes for taxation in the US Congress, but of course, those purposes are actually quite flexible in how they are interpreted. One is to pay debt of the federal government, and the second is to provide for the common defense, but also to provide for the general welfare, which I will talk about next. The Texas Constitution, on the other hand, mandates spending on specific policy areas, but in the US Congress, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, quotes, provides for the general welfare of all of the citizens and residents of the United States of America. And that gives for broad latitude in what that could encompass and what that means. So a couple of other things. The Texas Legislature cannot implement personal income tax or personal tax income. And the US Congress implements federal taxes. As many of us know, it is tax season, and I believe Texas has gotten an extension just recently because of the winter storm. So you'll want to go ahead and catch up on that information through the IRS or the Internal Revenue Service. The Texas Legislature cannot allow the state to go into debt. That is one of its crucial features, whereas the US Congress does have constantly work with the US debt, both to other countries and industry. And so the US Congress meets for 2 sessions, one for each year that there's a full Congress. Again, because the US House of Representatives get voted in every two years or so. And so in the Texas Legislature, though, they meet biannually for 140 days. So very similar, except for, of course, turnaround can be very different and varied at the House of Representatives and the Texas Legislature, among the Senate as well. So there's also a difference in this salary, and this is going to be maybe pretty startling for a lot of folks, but the salary for the Texas Legislature, or a Texas congressperson, or I'm sorry, legislative person, is $7,200 a year, which means that most representatives have to have some other primary income in order to be able to sustain their living. Whereas the average salary of a US congressperson is $174,000 a year, because it is presumed that person is working solely on being a congressperson, 365 days out of a year. The number of representatives in the Texas House of Representatives is 105, where the number of representatives in the U.S. House of Representatives is 435. And again, we talked about appropriation or apportionment in our U.S. Congress session last week. So if you want to kind of hear some more information on that, you can tune in to our U.S. Congress recording when we go ahead and have that up soon, both on our YouTube page and on Facebook. And so then finally, for the number of senators in the U.S. Senate, there's 102 senators per state, which with 50 states makes 100 senators. And then the number of senators in the Texas Senate is 31. So we're going to go ahead and repeat how you can contact your representative. If you have seen session 1 of our Civics 201 session, this will look familiar. When you watch session 2, this will also look very familiar, but we cannot stress enough how important it is to contact your representative, whether it's at the US Congress or it's at the state legislature. So if you were to type in mylwv.org/Texas, you can find our state league information. And so within that page, under Advocacy and Issues on the left side menu, you click on it and it'll have a bunch of other links, the bottom link being who represents you. When you click on that link, which I'll illustrate here, you'll go ahead and see this page come up, and it'll ask, it'll have a statement at the very top, your elected officials work for you, and how to find those elected officials if you choose to use the Texas State League of Women Voters site. So by going to the site, you click on that link, you go to find your elected officials. You'll put a street number and your name, or the street name, and the 5-digit zip code that applies to your street that you are looking up. And then you click the button for Get Local. Once you've done that, it'll come up with a list of all of your representatives of that area. So all of your elected officials, from the federal office level of president and vice president, your congresspeople, and down to your governor, your state representatives, any county officials that have been elected that you should know about, and also your city officials, so city manager, your mayor, and your council member. So that's really good to know, because we will eventually talk about local government, and so we want to go ahead and keep that in mind as we're moving forward. So other ways you can contact your representatives at both the state and federal level. You, again, go to the League of Women Voters of Texas as a resource, or you can go to the U.S. Congress Directory of House of Representatives, which is illustrated above, as well as senators at senate.gov/index.htm, short for HTML. So you use it, there's a drop-down menu once you get to that page at the very top left side of that website. You want to click on that and you'll be able to proceed from that menu. And for the Texas Legislature, if you are solely looking for your representatives, you can go to wrm.capitol.texas.gov/home to find that information. So how do you get to know these people? Well, foremost, you sign up for their office mailing lists. Follow them on social media. Social media is very active in trying to get your attention. It's another form of communication. So a lot of times, as representatives gain traction, they'll start posting more on their social media. So you can find a trusted news source as well. There are several, especially local news sources that'll cover our state legislature. In the Austin area in particular, a lot of Austin news sources cover our state legislature. Revisit voter guides and candidate forums as well. There's always these voter guides that the league puts out, or maybe other organizations or mediums put out, and you can usually find those and reference back to them online. So, if you want to look for a voter guide for a particular year or election, you can go ahead and just put that into Google and find what you need. As well as recorded candidate forums. Now that we've moved more into online communication because of the pandemic, a lot of candidate forums tend to have gotten recorded, especially if they were shared through Facebook. So that's a way that you can go ahead and revisit those different mediums. You communicate with them, and it seems pretty straightforward to say that, but it can also feel a little complicated to doing that. So how do you know which office to contact? Well, you can call 311 and ask the operator. You can also look online to find out. Type "who represents me" in your search bar. Again, I cannot stress enough, the League of Women Voters of Texas has our "Who Represents Me" link where you can search for your representatives, and it's as extensive as going from our federal offices as president, vice president, all the way down to your city council member. So please take advantage of these kind of resources that are out there. So using your voice, contacting your representative by phone, by letter, or by email is your opportunity to state your opinion and educate them on an issue. If you happen to live in the state capital of Austin, or if you happen to live near a congressional member's office, whether that's your local representative or a U.S. State or U.S. congressional office, you can also try and introduce yourself, make yourself become acquainted with that office, become acquainted with the bills that congressperson or legislative person is trying to pass on the floor, so that way you know a little bit more about how to advocate for yourself and your community at large. So a couple of tips. When you contact your representative, let them know who you are and the area that you live in. In fact, most times you might get asked what your full name is and what your zip code is, so that way that the person taking your message can go ahead and relay that back to the representative, and they can kind of get a better idea of what the constituency looks like. So you'll also want to discuss just one topic and ask them to take a specific action on that topic. It's a little bit difficult when you have multiple topics at hand and approach your representative asking for multiple things, because they might get mixed up in all of the conversation. And so it's easier if you can approach your representative with one topic at a time. That doesn't mean you have to restrict yourself to only advocating for one topic throughout the course of that representative's tenure or term, but at least at the point of asking for a specific item, you want to make sure it's just one item at a time, mainly because you are also one constituent out of many. And so it's easier to kind of keep track of how many constituents are maybe pro or against a certain topic or issue, as opposed to being a constituent who comes in with 5 and then having to kind of rearrange all of that at once. That's by no means the only way you have to do it, but it's a very encouraged way of approaching your representative. Take one topic and ask them to take a specific action. Keep your message short and simple. You want to make sure you get your who, what, where, when, why, and how, especially your what, why, how to your representative when you are discussing an issue that is something that you are advocating for. remember to always thank whoever you're speaking to for their time, whether it's the representative directly or their office staff. These people are also still taking time out of what they could have been doing in a different situation. And they do this a lot of times because they're passionate for it, especially office staff of US congressmen or congresspeople and legislative representatives. They work hard to be able to continue to support the work of our representatives. So it's important to, also express gratitude for the time that they are able to take in listening to you. So a couple more ways to engage. Make sure you can attend meetings, and this is not as complicated as it sounds these days. A lot of representative meetings, House of Representatives and Senate meetings at both the federal and state level are being broadcast now on the websites for the House of Representatives or the Senate. For Texas, it's the Texas Legislative Online website, which we'll provide later the link for. So providing testimony. In fact, just recently with the winter storms here in Texas, almost immediately after the storms had passed, or actually right before the storms had passed, there was a push for committee hearings on and testimony on the power outages that happen in most of Texas at our Texas Legislature. So being aware of when you're able to provide testimony for issues that you are either supporting or you have reservations for, that kind of access is available. And with being online now, that is actually more available to a broader spectrum of people who otherwise wouldn't have been able to come to the state capital of Texas and Austin to be able to provide testimony for committees. So you also want to support organizations who share your same interests and engage with your representatives. One of those organizations is, of course, the League of Women Voters, both the Austin area and our League of Women Voters of Texas. Leagues, which we were always interested and we're always happy to speak with potential members about where they can fit into the organization or how the organization can best suit their interests and where they feel like they can contribute the most. So if you have any questions, comments, or if you want to go ahead and just ask about how to become a league member, you can email us at lwvaustin@lwvaustin.org. Likewise, there are plenty of organizations that also have varied interests and are engaged with representatives in a multitude of ways. And that goes from the federal level all the way down to your city representative level. So it just takes a little bit of kind of finding where your interest lies, what issue or topic you want to help advocate the most for, and how you can get involved with those organizations. Sometimes an organization needs more volunteers and time with those volunteers. Other times it could be what we consider treasure or monetary or financial donations to be able to help keep the wheels of an organization running. If you have a minute or less, if you have 15 seconds, something you can do is you can tweet, you can write a short blog post, or forward an action alert to your network or your community of people. That might be family or friends or even coworkers, classmates who have a similar interest in a particular piece of legislation that is being passed or considered. And so you want to go ahead and just make sure you can spread that information. If it can take you a second to text, then you're good to go. If you have 30 seconds, you want to go ahead and take some time to enlighten a friend with your knowledge on an issue. So you can go a little bit deeper than just letting them know about this action, and also letting them know what you might know about this action, where the direction of this legislation that is being considered or is about to be passed is. And so you can go ahead and provide a little bit more insight. If you have a minute, you can make a list of 3 action steps you can take in the future for advocacy. Action steps can range from, making it a point to regularly email a particular representative, or it could be tracking a bill through from proposal to its final vote, and also informing others of that. So action steps can look varied according to what time you may be able to commit to. And of course, you can take any ideas for action steps from the following slides. If you have more than a minute to spare, if you have 3 minutes, you want to call your representative. And remember to identify yourself, describe the issue or the concern, ask them to take a specific action, and say thank you. Again, most of the time you're going to be speaking to their office staff. So, remember that this is something that they are doing for the love of public policy and government. And, even if you have varied opinions from a certain representative, their staff is still trying to work the best they can for our community. So if you have 5 minutes, type an email to your elected official sharing an in-depth explanation of your stance on a certain issue or initiative. Give them a little bit more insight into what you're considering about this issue or concern and why it should be something that they should consider as well. If you have a lot of time on your hands, join a local board or commission. This is especially strong at the city level. There are various commissions on arts and safety and all kinds of different policies. So if you want to do that, be a part of that conversation, and you can sign up, and we'll have more information on this when we do talk about local government. You can join a watchdog organization that holds public offices accountable. So that's another way if you want to get more involved and you have that time. So a couple more tips for contacting your representatives. The following slides will have URLs to different things, different resources, and we'll go ahead and make these accessible to everyone through PDF form after this presentation, and especially for those of you who have tuned in through our Zoom session. So you want to make your voice heard, which is part of the PDF from the League of Women Voters of Illinois Education Fund and the League of Women Voters of Wheaton. In this particular PDF on page 4, that gives pointers on, again, how do you contact your representative? What should you keep in mind when doing so? If you're looking for an action item to start with, you can go to our Texas League website and click under advocacy issues to find a ways to take action, and we'll have more information for you on that at the end of our presentation. How do you find current session bills? And we covered this for Congress in particular last time, but we'll also talk about the Texas Legislature. You can find the calendars, committees, bill lookup, broadcasts, and much more information at congress.gov if you're looking for information on the U.S. Congress. If you're looking to find current session bill information at the Texas Legislature, you can go to capital.texas.gov, and you'll come across the calendars, committees, bill lookup, broadcasts, and more for our Texas Legislature. To kind of go with a different resource for looking at session bills, you can go to Legiscan, which is a website that provides information on bills, sponsorship committees. Not so much broadcasts, but you can find both the U.S. information and the Texas Legislature information at legiscan.com/US for U.S. Congress and legiscan.com/TX for the Texas Legislature. So the sources for this PowerPoint presentation have been varied. The Constitution of the United States has information on the specifics about House of Representatives and U.S. Senator qualifications needed. And Constitution Annotated is also a really good site from the U.S. government that breaks down the different segments of the Constitution in ways that can be a little bit more easier to understand. Dallas Learning Cloud is where we were able to find information about how the Texas Constitution and the U.S. Constitution, comparing and contrasting in regards to the legislative branch. Texas House of Representatives Frequently Asked Questions is a great source for finding out information about the Texas House of Reps. And the Texas Senate Citizen Handbook, How the Texas Legislature Works PDF, is also a great resource. They actually provide information on both House of Representatives and Texas Senate, just how the makeup is, again, what are the qualifications, or what do you need to, how old do you need to be? How long do you need to live in a certain place in Texas in order to run for office? So all of that is in that handbook as well. Investopedia, which is a Wikipedia of sorts about financial investment. There's an article called Who Sets Fiscal Policy, the President or the Congress, in which you can find some answers towards fiscal policy and how that's set at the federal level. United States Senate, Sessions of the Senate, is also a great place that discusses how sessions are broken down at the US Senate level. And for the salary and benefits information for congressmen and senators, it was part taken from the House of Representatives Frequently Asked Questions and the article from Indeed.com, which is titled The Salary and Benefits of Congressmen and Senators. And you can find that link on the source page and in the PDF that will be provided. A couple of recommendations. If you are looking to expand your knowledge on civics and you're not really sure where to start at this point, if you're an auditory learner and you just learn better that way, there are some podcasts. One is Civics 101, which is done, if you might have heard of this through NPR, if you happen to listen to NPR. It's a great podcast that has been running for a few years that goes over all kinds of issues of, basic questions about how does the Senate run, and what happens in this situation. And so if you're looking for kind of basic civics questions to be answered, you're really good with listening, that's a great podcast. There's a podcast as well from the National Conference of State Legislatures titled Our American States. And this is actually a podcast where different state legislative representatives discuss different issues that are affecting each state. So everything from financial to education to just government, how it's run in a particular state. So for visual learners, there's some really great videos on YouTube. One is the Bicameral Congress. It's a part of the Crash Course Government and Politics series. It's a lot of these might feel kind of schoolhouse rock when you watch them, but it does help if you have no place to start really, and it also is a great way of being able to come back to it when you need to and refer to it. The Texas Legislature Explained by the Daily Texan is another resource that you can find on YouTube that is visual. For interactive learners, there are a couple of kind of video games that you can play online. First one is Branches of Power by iCivics.org, and this concentrates on US government. They do have a game where you work or you kind of play as a representative from Texas County, and so that's kind of a new one that has come out, and we'll go into more detail later when we discuss local governments. So, and finally, there's the American Democracy game, which was kind of referred to from the National Conference of State Legislatures. And it starts at a city council level. Again, these games are, or at least the American Democracy game is very kind of geared maybe more towards those who haven't even had really an elementary level learning of government. And so maybe you want to play with your children if you have any, or if you just really want to kind of find out, this is a great place to start. So we're at the end of our presentation. I do want to say to stay on top of these issues of interest, to sign up to get action alerts at lwvtexas.org, or you can text ACTION to 80123. Again, that's text ACTION to 80123. So our previous civic sessions can be seen on our YouTube channel. And so the link is on here, but it will be provided through our PDF as well. Thank you so much for tuning in this Saturday. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now, but if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please feel free to email us if you're watching on Facebook. And if you are on Zoom, I will take any questions now.